this is my review of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Okay, so this episode actually starts with a bit of backstory regarding Giorno and how he came to be the man he is. So it starts off with the narrator more or less explaining Giorno's life up until that point, and explains how understandably so, since we've seen this, but Dio didn't respect women like at all. So he mostly viewed them as tools and food. And for the most part, just kind of kept them around because he just kept them around as a food supply, basically, or to treat them like, or to just use them as for errands and stuff like that. And we've seen a bit of this because some of his female followers showing an almost godlike devotion to Dio, but Dio doesn't return that sentiment like at all. We've seen this in part 3 specifically. But yeah, Dio just kind of did not respect women at all. So that's kind of a large mystery about how Giorno was even conceived. And the narrator points out that even he isn't entirely sure. Pointing out that since Dio did not care for women, and mostly did not really by extension did not care enough to actually keep them around for more than just food or tools he could use for his own personal ends. It is unknown how Giorno's mother survived long enough to actually birth a child and raise it for 15 years. So it's kind of unknown how that actually happened. But what is known is that shortly after giving birth to Giorno, it quickly becomes apparent that his mom is not a very good mother. As we find out, she frequently left him home alone, even when he was at the ripe old age of 2. And she constantly went out to party with her friends and frequently left Giorno alone to sit in the dark in his crib, Giorno just kind of never learned kindness from her. He literally just sat alone, trembling in the dark, knowing full well that crying was useless because his mom was out all the hours of the night and would never be there to actually come and support him. But eventually his mom did wind up marrying, and he wound up having a stepdad who wasn't much better. As we find out, his stepdad frequently beat him. And though ironically, the reason he beat his stepson is because Giorno constantly tried to analyze people, and it freaked people out, and he's not. And the thing is, ironically enough, Giorno actually picked up that ability from his stepdad. So the irony is that his stepdad beats him for something that he himself taught Giorno by accident. So, and doesn't fully realize it. And also another thing is that Giorno was kind of bullied as a kid as well. As we find out, because he's kind of lived in a home where his parents didn't really care for him, and because he was half Japanese and kind of lived in Italy and was the only one of the few Japanese kids that was currently living in Italy, he was constantly bullied for that. And the kids kind of just picked on him whenever they damn well pleased. So Giorno ultimately felt like he was the scum of the earth and just felt like he wasn't worth breathing the same air as everybody else. That is until one fateful day where he was walking home from school, and he noticed a gangster lying wounded in a patch of grass, tucked in an alley to actually hide from other gangsters who were trying to kill him. And Giorno, seeing the man and realizing that he was likely alone, very much alone, same as Giorno was, decided to protect him. He points the gangsters in the wrong direction from where the guy actually was hiding. And on top of that, although Giorno doesn't really remember having his stand at that point, Giorno actually subconsciously used gold experience to hide the man's body by making the patch of grass he was lying in longer and making it easier for him to actually conceal the man's unconscious body until he can actually recover. And sure enough, the man 2 months later then tracked down Giorno and thanked him for saving him, remarking that he'll never forget the kindness that he did him, and he doesn't forget the kindness that he did him, because shortly after saving the gangster from his let's just say associates, Giorno's life started to turn around. His stepfather stopped beating him because he knew the gangster was looking out for Giorno and would probably come after him if he did anything. The kids at school started being nice to him and even offering to hang out with him. And on top of that, every once in a while he would get free ice cream from a certain ice cream shop because the man who ran it was associated with the gangster that Giorno saved. So overall, because of this random stranger, Giorno wound up learning empathy and learning how to trust others. It's because he didn't pick that up from his parents, but he wound up picking it up from the silent interactions with a random stranger who he hasn't really interacted with since, but knows full well that is keeping an eye on him. And Giorno's admiration of the man only goes a little bit further. When he's walking home from school and hears a gunshot, and then sees his gangster friend walking out of the alley, and meeting up with an associate to go back to their headquarters. At which point it's revealed that he actually did shoot a man. And the kid of the man he shot comes to confront him. Only for the gangster to reveal that he actually killed the man. He actually killed the boy's father because, as it turns out, the boy's father was a piece of shit. Not only did he sell drugs, which were illegal under the jurisdiction of the guy, which were illegal in the guy's jurisdiction, and he pointed out that he had to go through with permission. But on top of that, he was selling those drugs to women and children. And for that reason, he had to kill him because obviously he was causing problems on a widespread scale. He was selling drugs to children and women, and that's not a good thing. So, and the boy does seem to recognize this, and pointing out that he was more than willing to shoot the gangster, but for whatever reason can't. And that's at this point where Giorno decides to come up with his lifelong dream, and throughout the many 15 years of his life, he actually does wind up deciding to become a gangstar, a combination of a gangster and a superstar. But he wants to become a gangstar and wants to kind of follow in the man's footsteps and actually help and actually do what he set out to do, which is to clean up the streets and keep all the bad guys in check, so that nobody has to suffer in the town of Naples, Italy. And we have seen evidence of this. Obviously in that first sequence we saw of him, he was walking through the streets of Naples and was just completely disgusted with all the crime and drugs and violence and all the other things that he saw. So obviously that's still very much a dream for him. He very much wants to keep the streets safe, and so that his fellow Italians can actually live in well, not necessarily peace, but rather they don't have to worry about organized crime anymore. But in any case, it goes back to the present day where Giorno and Bruno are actually still fighting one another. And Giorno is still fresh off the fact that he just got beaten, and Bruno even gloats that Giorno should feel like parts of him are falling off. And Bruno does point out that if he wanted to, he could easily sever Giorno's head from the rest of his body and then roll his head around and just interrogate the head and leave the body alone. And Giorno quickly realizes that he needs to defend himself. He quickly realizes that he needs to summon gold experience and beat the shit out of Bruno to defend himself, but quickly realizes that he's not entirely sure what would happen if he did that, because as we've seen up to this point, Giorno has mostly used gold experience to create life and then redirect people's own attacks back at them. He hasn't attacked anybody directly yet, and he's unsure of what will happen if he does. But he does, and realizes that he actually does need to actually face off against Bruno, or he's going to be killed. And then he proceeds to summon gold experience, much to Bruno's surprise, and then proceeds to send him flying with one punch. While Giorno is a little surprised as to how he can still be moving, even since he got hit by single-handedly. Bruno does eventually get up, and then we discover what the effect of Gold Experience actually hitting somebody is. So as it turns out, Bruno is very much alive and well, and also, interestingly enough, when Giorno hit him, he actually overclocked Bruno's senses, and Bruno quickly realizes this when he accidentally breaks a pipe in his hand. And then he tries to stand up, but realizes that he leaps into the air instead. And realizing that now that this is Gold Experience power, realizes that he now has an advantage against Giorno, and calls Giorno foolish for if his stand actually imbued him with his enemies with power. And then proceeds to go in and punch Giorno, only to discover that it doesn't actually work. At which point we find out the actual cause of what Giorno did. As it turns out, Giorno did overclock his senses, but it was to the extent that Bruno effectively had an out-of-body experience. Case in point, while his senses and everything else have been enhanced to the point where he feels like he's moving at supersonic speed, his body isn't. His body is very much moving at its normal pace, and Bruno can only watch in terror as Giorno punches him in the face and knocks out one of his teeth. And the pain is just extended over a long period of time. At which point Bruno winds up going flying. After Giorno finally defeats him, one of the citizens actually voices his concern. One of the citizens on the subway that they're riding actually voices a concern about what's going to happen to him, pointing out that he doesn't want anybody causing problems around him. But Giorno assures him that first and foremost, he apologizes for making a mess, but more to the point, he then assures the citizen that they won't be involving any civilians in the fight, and that he's completely safe. At which point Bruno gets back up and goes back at Giorno again. And summons his stand, Sticky Fingers. We kind of seen a glimpse of Sticky Fingers up to this point, but we haven't actually seen what its full appearance. And obviously, we already know what it does. It can create zippers on any surface. That's its main ability. It attacks Giorno and puts zippers all over his body, which causes Giorno's body to literally fall apart because Sticky Fingers is literally unzipping him and zipping him into little tiny pieces. And Giorno after Bruno gets over his initial shock about being hit by Gold Experience, the two do clash a bit, which does confirm to Bruno that his stand is actually a bit more powerful than Giorno's, but realizing that Giorno's power is a lot deadlier than his stand's actual strength, he realizes that he needs to actually get out there and fight, and goes off to fight another day. But points out that he will continue to hound Giorno until he actually beats him. And Giorno quickly realizing that Bruno actually has to that Bruno is actually going to continue hounding him if he doesn't chase after him. Then proceeds to follow Giorno proceeds to follow Bruno out of the subway, revealing that Bruno can actually use Sticky Fingers to make doors where there shouldn't be doors. Long story short, he just unzips various surfaces and then proceeds to just walk through them and use them as portals to get to places faster. So he basically can create a shortcut through any solid surface. And Giorno, since he's unable to do that, actually does break a window and chases after Bruno, quickly realizing that if he doesn't catch Bruno is going to tell his friends about him, and then obviously he's going to have a lot more problems on his hands. But eventually he does corner Bruno in an alley with 4 other people, which Bruno is apparently counting on, and then proceeds to bump into several of them. And then Giorno quickly realizes that Bruno has disappeared, and realizing he didn't leave the alley, eventually deduces that Bruno most likely used his stands to hide inside one of the civilians, and using the fact that Giorno said that civilians would be safe from their little onslaught, from their little battle, and realizes that Giorno is actually Bruno is actually legally hiding in one of them. But since he doesn't know which one is which and who is who, he does wind up using his stand to actually figure it out. And we do find this out later, but but as one of the men, a young boy around Giorno's age of 15, does wind up walking away. He's suddenly attacked by a fly, which keeps swarming him and won't leave him alone. Eventually, the man gets sick of it and successfully swats the fly, only for it to be revealed that that's a fly created by Gold Experience. As it turns out, Giorno at some point prior to leaving the subway actually grabbed the tooth that he actually knocked out of Bruno's mouth and turned it into a fly, knowing full well that the fly would lead him back to Bruno. And case in point, when the man got hit the fly, the recoil caused the man to collapse, and Bruno took damage from it. So because of that, Bruno actually comes out of hiding and is forced to actually confront Giorno again. At which point Bruno declares that it'll only take one hit for each of them to win. Since Bruno can create zippers and cause Giorno to completely fall apart, and Giorno can accelerate his senses to the point where he won't be able to defend himself. So, and one hit between either of them is enough to call it quits and end the fight. And sure enough, they do proceed to clash. Gold Experience and Sticky Fingers begin fighting one another. And Giorno does successfully land a hit on Bruno's left arm. Only for it to be revealed that Bruno is completely unaffected by this, and then proceeds to successfully hit Giorno and cause him to unzip. And when Giorno expresses confusion over the fact that Bruno was able to actually survive his onslaught, Bruno reveals that he actually swapped arms with the guy he was hiding in. And then what Giorno actually attacked was the other guy instead. Then reveals that he can actually amputate his limbs and replace them with the limbs of other people. And then proceeds to unzip the limb from himself and drop it to the floor. And then proceeds to go in to kill Giorno, but hesitates a bit when he actually sees the arm hit the floor. At which point Giorno takes that moment of hesitation to actually rip off his own arm, which has now been unzipped by Sticky Fingers, and then to artificially extend his reach and hit Bruno with an attack directly by Gold Experience. At which point Bruno realizes he's screwed because now his senses have been accelerated, and obviously Giorno is planning to kill him. Even says so earlier in the episode. But as Giorno is closing in and Bruno begins to panic, Giorno then walks past him and out of both of their stands' range, and Bruno returns to normal. And when Bruno expresses confusion, pointing out that Giorno was planning to kill him, Giorno points out that he decided not to because he noticed that Bruno is a good person. Case in point, we then find out why the arm falling off of Bruno surprised him so much. As it turns out, the kid that Bruno had hidden was a drug user. As we find out, he actually heavily takes drugs, and Bruno was a little bit conflicted by that because, as it turns out, and as we find out, Bruno's boss is actually the one distributing the drugs that the boy had been taking. So, for that reason, he realized that Bruno wasn't going to attack him and was therefore a good person, because obviously Bruno does care about people and isn't a bad guy. He realizes that what they're doing is a problem and wants to make it better, but he can't because he's working under his boss, and what his boss says goes. And when Bruno then expressively points out that it doesn't really matter if he's a good person or not, since he's planning to kill Giorno anyway, and that his boss ordered him to. Giorno then proceeds to point out that he actually doesn't feel like Bruno is actually going to kill him, because as Giorno explains, and then proceeds to explain his life goal. He plans to actually take out Bruno's boss, become the head of their organization. And to do that, he's planning to actually join up with Bruno and actually work his way up the organization to actually become the head of the organization. And Bruno is a little bit surprised by this point, realizing that he actually has to take on the boss. And Giorno points out that he doesn't really care because, as he points out, his lifelong dream is to become a gang star, and nothing is going to get in the way of that. So Yeah, that's a very so. Yeah, that's how this episode ends. So Giorno winds up making a friend unwittingly. I mean, I'm not entirely sure if Bruno would count as a friend, but he does wind up befriending Bruno, and Bruno does seem to acknowledge that Giorno isn't going to kill him, and does kind of take an admiration in Giorno's goal. But this episode is interesting because it's just a fight. It's just a fight between Giorno and Bruno, and how Giorno actually winds up joining Bruno's organization. He fights Bruno, and then decides to spare him, and the two decide to join forces. Which is interesting. And also, Giorno's backstory is interesting as well. This episode, that's what most of this episode was. A good third of this episode's runtime was dedicated to Giorno's backstory, and it's a very interesting mystery. Why would, I mean, obviously, it does pose an interesting mystery. If Dio was such a manipulating bastard that he didn't really care about women, then why does Giorno exist? That's the interesting thing this episode brings up. Why does Giorno exist if Dio was expressly stated to not care for women? So yeah, that's an interesting point. But more to the point, this is where the story actually starts, with Giorno actually being able to fulfill his lifelong dream of becoming a gang star by joining up with Bruno and actually joining his organization, working his way up the ranks and taking down their boss. And that's where the story is going to go seems to be going from here. So I'm interested to see how this is going to play out. I'm interested to see who Giorno is going to have to fight on his way up to the top, and more to the point, what friends he's actually going to make inside the criminal organization. I'm interested to see how that's going to play out. But for right now, I think I'm going to leave this episode here. So that's my review of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Golden Wind. What did you guys think? Let's get discussing them in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. Be sure to check out my Patreon if you want to help support me. It's only a couple bucks a month. It helps me out, and you guys get access to a bunch of cool perks. I'm always saying thanks. So be sure to go check those out in the description below as well. Also, if you guys want to see more content from me, then be sure to check out my Twitch. I stream every Sunday, 2:30 Eastern Standard Time. If you guys want to go check that out, by all means, go ahead. Link is down in the description. You can also find it by searching Zack Marshall's Twitch on twitch.tv. And also, finally, if you want to see more content from me, then be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen. The top video is the most recent video. It may or may not be this one. Whereas the bottom video is the video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me. So, if you want to try something new or see more of what you like, then be sure to check both of those videos out. But, regardless of whether or not you do any of those things, thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace!